SMCS4. The purpose of the news media. The term fake news is said in excess in the political sphere. Although, when I observe the news, most of the programming is heavily opinionated, agenda-pushing, and ratings-motivated, I wouldn't classify any of it as fake. In fact, I find it to be somewhat truthful. However, the news has forgotten the reason it became an organization. The news's original intent was to inform society about the political affairs in the nation and world. Sadly, most news stories aren't fake. They just aren't news stories. I've labeled these not news. In this essay, I will identify the heavily opinionated, agenda-pushing, and ratings-motivated behavior of news outlets, respectively, of course, as well as provide some correction. Definitions. Now, I have tried to remove the term fake news from the discussion because its meaning is diluted due to the terms of overusage. To rectify this issue, I have invented new defining terms and segregated the news into three categories. First, actual news is a political story that presents all the facts and presents the journalist's opinions based upon the facts. Of course, the opinion is not overshadowed by the facts. Second is not news. We'll describe news stories that don't belong in the news at all. Examples are car chases, scientific studies, pop culture, tabloids on celebrities, fad diets, talk show hosts, etc. Lastly, mixed news, which is a mixture of actual news and not news. You'll find most news stories are this. And it's very difficult to evaluate a mixed news story because there is an unbalanced dichotomy between fact and opinion. A fact is simply what happened. An opinion is supposed to be synthesized, sometimes not, from facts. Example of a fact. Donald Trump said, "Organization is a terrorist group." Example of an opinion. Donald Trump is a conclusion because he said, "Organization is a terrorist group." Now that these terms are defined, let us practice evaluating mixed news stories by defining its problems and altering how we ingest these news stories. First is heavily opinionated. Privy to our definitions, mixed news stories have a greater number of opinions than facts in any given news story. For instance, a news story may present a fact that states President Trump said, quote, and then, based upon that one fact, they will extrapolate information, speculate, and diagnose solutions. The opinions of the broadcaster become the whole news story. You can always tell a broadcaster is speculating when the question becomes broader and broader. Why do you think President Trump said this? Extrapolating. Or the broadcaster may propose. What do you think he means by this? Speculating. These questions should raise an alarm in your mind that you've left the facts and are dealing with opinions. Although speculating and extrapolating can sometimes benefit audiences, my main issue is the prevalence of them. In a 25-minute news segment, a broadcaster spends 3 minutes giving facts and 22 minutes giving opinions. I noticed that most mixed news stories is about promoting opinions, and this can be detrimental to unseasoned citizens because they will mistake these opinions as facts, ruining the purpose of the news segment in the first place. How do we fix the communication? I cannot tell who to blame for the dilution of opinions and facts, but some of the burden falls on the news, while most of the burden falls upon the citizens. Educating every individual about the news is impossible, since citizens naturally resist being taught. A better alternative would be adjusting the news. Perhaps giving a visual cue to differentiate between opinion and facts, so any citizen could easily distinguish between fact and opinion. As it stands, the boundary between fact and opinions are blurred. Without an on-screen notification, citizens are left to evaluate and synthesize the highest levels of thinking for themselves, a task that is not easily done by the majority. But the news makes it more difficult to distinguish fact from opinion because of their agenda. Agenda pushing. Contrary to what most news organizations say, they are pushing an agenda. These agendas are hidden in plain sight and are ever-changing. Intent is a major role in agenda proliferation. A good way to identify agenda-pushing behavior is to ask, what do you expect me to do with this information? Once you find the answer to that question, you can identify the agenda. The technique is fine, but if an agenda is established before information is digested, we have dysfunctional news reporting. And I also find that the anchor, when talking with a special guest, has already decided what to believe before the information is discovered. More simply, they presume conclusions instead of discovering conclusions. Examples include statements that begin with, "Isn't it strange that," or "Everybody knows that." Of course, it is okay to have a presumed conclusion, a hypothesis, before arriving at an actual conclusion. But when the news anchor refuses to concede their hypothesis, the segment has become tainted. You'll never find a news segment ending with, "Wow, maybe I was wrong about my thought process. Thank you for teaching me and the viewers something new." I find that most news segments are engaged in promoting their hypotheses instead of gathering facts. So, most special guests are unintelligent straw men used to defame any opposing view or experts that already agree with their presuppositions. Why are news outlets engaged in defaming all contrary perspectives? The answer is money. Ratings-motivated behavior. The biggest problem in the news today is that news organizations must pay their own employees based solely on advertising revenue. This becomes problematic when the truth doesn't increase advertising revenue. Sometimes actual news is boring and incapable of generating revenue for the organization. So the organization brings not news into a story to make it more entertaining. An example is, "This new idea is applied poorly," is far less interesting than, "This new idea is killing America." As we can see, both statements are opinions, but have different impacts upon the viewer. The first one is accurate, while the second one is hyperbolous sensationalism designed to generate ratings. Ultimately, news organizations want to acquire more viewership and would do anything that it can to increase ratings. Ratings corresponds to cash, and cash keeps the news organizations in business. When the motives of a news organization become focused upon making a profit instead of educating the voting population, the news outlet produces mixed or even not news. Conclusion. I want to stress that I have no intention of censoring any news outlet. I believe not news should exist. However, my hope is that we can refine our skills and gain the ability to discern between actual news, not news, and mixed news, while also distinguishing between fact and opinion. The news today is not fulfilling its purpose and is engaged in hurling sophomoric accusations to gain popularity, money, and political power. The news has lost much integrity and has no values, a common theme in America. Instead, only acting upon its own interests. Thus, the news has become a detriment to society instead of a benefit. Therefore, the society that ingests the most news are in fact misinformed. An oxymoronic statement, because the news is missing information. I hope we can salvage the news by becoming more critical of the information presented to us. Regards, the new Publius. P.S. I also want to stress that the news anchors and reporters are under constant stress to submit stories that produce revenue and ideology. This letter is more directed at executives, CEOs, CIOs, COOs, etc., and administrators of the organization. The news has a leadership problem, not an execution problem. They execute their jobs effectively. However, it's headed in the wrong direction.